Warning: these social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Good morning, everybody. It is the 14th day of December. Spectre here with another edition of In Case You Missed It news here this morning. Hopefully you guys are doing well. A little chipper in these parts of the country. A little frosty here this morning, but looks like we're going to warm up pretty good here into the 50s on the day. Tomorrow, on the other hand, holy cow, looks like we're almost in springtime weather. We're going to be up in the upper 60s, close to 70 degrees for this time of year. Let's just hope we don't have a little bit of a repeat of what we saw play out Friday into Saturday night. But on the broadcast here this morning, obviously we'll get into some financials. We'll talk a little bit about gas and power prices in Europe, things going on there. Fed losing control as now consumers are expecting 10% inflation. California got a little bit going on by way of their solar customers, hospitals dropping vax mandates due to labor shortages. Oh, Vox buying Thrillist publisher group on the day. Former Lehman trader losing money on Evergrande and all that good stuff. And then PPI report out here this morning. We're going to get into all of that and more. Stick around. We'll be right back. Everybody, Spectre here. Just wanted to give a big thank you to all you guys who continue to support my work. Jump in, day out on the streams, support all the various pieces I put out, etc., etc. And in doing so, I figured what the heck, we'll put some merch out there if you guys wish to continue to support and help defray some of the costs of streaming, which many of you guys know many of us incur. Got a handful of shirts and that here. Spectre Does News. We got the Realize, Real Lies shirt and that you hear on my PSA periodically. And of course the No BS insignia from the show I do over on the 5x5 channel, all of which you can get for the low price of $19.99. Aside from that, you can get the Let's Go Brandon hashtag FJB shirt as well in a variety of colors. And I've recently added the hoodies in a variety of colors you can get right there as well. And last but not least, you can grab yourself a No BS shirt and the Zip Up hoodie as well. If you don't want any articles of clothing, well, you can grab yourself a mug or a 20-ounce water tumbler if you wish. Your choice. And of course, as always, just want to thank you, the listeners, the audience, those who are in chat day in, day out. Thank you for your continued support. All right, weather-wise here this morning, not looking too terrible bad across the old country here. Looks like we got some storms now popping up across the west here and maybe some spotty stuff all across the Midwest to southeast here. Looking at the old precip cast, on the other hand, looks like definitely a lot of this stuff coming across the west. Got rain, probably California into parts of Nevada before it converts to snow and kind of all the way up the line there all the way up through Idaho into Montana. And of course, temperature wise here today, as mentioned, it's not supposed to be too bad here, frankly. A lot of this cold weather is still up in Canada. It's a nice spot for it. And looks like right now we're probably going to get some of this 50-degree bubble and that pushing through here through the Midwest, Ohio River Valley, and that here today. Hopefully even better tomorrow. So kind of looking forward to that. Outside of that, futures reviews reverse lower as Fed meeting looms. U.S. stock futures fell on Tuesday, reversing an earlier gain as traders prepared for this year's barrage of final central bankstem meetings this week. Treasury yields advanced and the dollar slipped. European stocks were a little changed, while Asian stocks dropped, led by Japan, whose Prime Minister Fumio Kishida hinted the government may consider guidelines for share buybacks. A tapering of stock buybacks in the U.S. would lead to an instant market crash. 7:45 a.m. S&P futures were down 0.17% or 8 points to 46.51. Nasdaq futures were down 0.5%, erasing earlier gains as much as 0.3% as traders assessed the impact of a less accommodative monetary setting and coronavirus challenges and high valuations. And here we obviously see our E-mini S&P futures on the morning. Investors focused on central bank meetings this week and kept a wary eye on developments around the Omicron virus, coronavirus variant. The Fed is expected to signal a faster pullback of asset purchases at the end of its two-day meeting on Wednesday, a move which Morgan Stanley believes will lead to market tremors in the next 3 to 4 months, while the European Central Bank and the Bank of England will meet on Thursday to determine a course for their monetary policies into 2022. Some of the movers on the day so far: shares in U.S. listed Chinese firms decline anew in U.S. pre-market trading as a sell-off in the stocks and bonds of Chinese property firm Shimao hits sentiment. Alibaba shares fall as much as 2.2% pre-market. Baidu is down 1.8%, and JD.com is down 2.2%. Purple Innovation shares dropped in post-market trading, and price targets are cut by analysts after it said its 2021 sales would come in at the low end of its previously slashed forecast, as well as naming Robert DeMartini as acting CEO. Alcoa shares rise as much as 5% in U.S. pre-market trading after the aluminum maker is set to join the S&P's mid-cap 400 index. Beyond Meat gained in post-market after Piper Sandler upgraded the stock to neutral from underweight, saying a U.S. nationwide launch in McDonald's appears to be coming late into the first quarter of 2022, earlier than we anticipated. So yeah, all those Big Macs you perhaps know and love, well, you might want to check to see if that's now going to be fake meat into the first quarter of next year. EQT climbed in post-market trading after its board authorizes a $1 billion buyback program effective immediately and valid through December 31st, 2023. Aside from that, looking at the old snapshot on the day here, S&P 500 futures down 0.4% to 46.51 and change. The Nikkei down 0.7%, 28,432.64. Shanghai Composite down 0.5% to 36.61 and change. Brent futures up 0.3% to 74.15 a barrel. Gold spots down 0.2% to 1783.61 per ounce. U.S. dollar index, little change at 96.31. Stocks Europe 600 up 0.3% to 474.98. And euro up 0.1% to 1.1296. Aside from that, Bloomberg overnight news with inflation dominating the conversation in Washington, those inside and outside the Fed trying to keep broad-based and inclusive employment at the top of the central bank's agenda for 2022, are facing an uphill battle. The Czech Central Bank, which was among the world's first to challenge the view that inflation was transitory, must continue its rapid interest rate increases to keep consumer prices under control, Governor Jiri Rosnak said. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and Norges Bank Deputy Governor Ida Wolden Bach are among the candidates to be Norway's next central bank chief. Oh, that's interesting. Global oil markets have returned to surplus and face an even bigger oversupply early next year as the Omicron variant impedes international travel, the International Energy Agency said. A two-shot course of Pfizer's vaccination may offer 70% protection against being hospitalized with the Omicron variant, South African medical insurance provider Discovery said. Leading scientists cautioned that the level of immunity against the coronavirus among South Africa's population due to earlier infections may be masking the severity of illness caused by Omicron. And of course, what that doesn't state is who actually funded said study. Nonetheless, top Asian news out of News Squawk here is China's Oppo touts mobile photography breakthrough with new chip. Toyota to plow $35 billion into accelerating electric car shift. Orban delays $5 billion Budapest airport deal on budget risk. And slump and Macau casino shares adds to Hong Kong stocks' many woes. Outside of that, back over to Europe, EU gas extends rally as crunch risks extending into next winter. COVID boosters are also the UK's answer to business aid appeal. Bank of England builds back better for UK banks as COVID risks recede. And Swedish inflation at 28-year record tests Riksbank's patience. And on the docket here today, by way of the calendar, 8:30 a.m., everything coming to a head by way of PPI. November PPI final demand month over month estimate of 0.5%. Prior was a 0.6. Year-over-year estimate of 9.2. Prior was an 8.6%. Also at 8:30, PPI ex food energy trade month over month estimate of 0.4. Same prior. Year-over-year was 6.2%. And November PPI ex food and energy month over month estimate of 0.4. Prior was also a 0.4. Year-over-year estimate of 7.2. Prior a 6.8. So that's a quick rundown of what's going on in the market here early this morning. European gas and power prices jump as supply shortage fears erupt. This come out yesterday morning. Says a combination of Russia's inactive Nord Stream 2 pipeline and cooler weather forecast through the end of December sparked a rally in European natural gas futures. German power prices surged to a record high, while French power prices jumped to a decade high. Concerns that Nord Stream 2 pipeline won't operate this winter season comes as the new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said his government would do everything possible to make sure natural gas flows continue through Ukraine and not the latest Russian to German undersea pipeline. Last month, German energy regulators suspended Nord Stream 2's certification process. The U.S. has also sanctioned companies affiliated with the pipeline's construction. On top of the geopolitical uncertainties mixed with tight natural gas supplies across Europe, some of the lowest in a decade, a new 14-day weather forecast shows cooler than average weather, which will boost natural gas demand. So apparently they are putting effectively the kibosh on Nord Stream, even though the thing is built, ready, can deliver gas, would wipe this whole scenario out, at the end of the day. But no, they want to run everything through Ukraine, continue to use Gazprom, and watch their people suffer. This is what governments do. They do not have your best interests in mind. Benchmark Dutch front month gas futures jumped as high as 10% to 116.39 euros a megawatt hour on Monday, the highest since October 6. UK gas futures also soared 10% to 294.07 pounds. And it says cooler weather on the continent has increased the power demand. German power contracts added 9.7% to a record 205 euros per megawatt hour. French power contracts rose to 329 euros per megawatt hour, the highest ever. And there we see Javier Blas, European energy crisis. Please keep moving. Nothing to see here. Just a crazy day of natural gas and electricity prices across all of Europe. TTF up to 117 euros per megawatt hour. Germany 1-year forward power up to 200 euros per megawatt hour. And day ahead electricity prices in France above 300 euros per megawatt hour. So yeah. This winter, Nord Stream 2 was supposed to be Europe's saving grace as stockpiles across the continent are well under seasonal trends. Without extra supplies, as storage is rapidly depleting, natural gas prices will likely continue rising, forcing power prices higher. So Citigroup wrote a note Monday that said gas prices in Europe are soaring because of a nervousness around demand in the remaining months of winter. They noted some positive news. Physical gas market is less tight than it was 4 to 6 weeks ago. On the other side of the Atlantic, there are no signs of supply tightness or frigid weather. Natural gas stockpiles remain in line with seasonal averages, and the chart below illustrates how energy markets are tight in Europe but calm in the U.S. And here per the red line, you see, obviously, this is EU-UK gas net that's been going up, up, and up. And of course, we've got U.S. natural gas, WTI crude net clear down here. Pretty big divergence net that took place back in July here where it started to split. But, gee, let's whip up a little polar vortex and see how quick we can jack that up. Where have we heard that story before, right? Says another way in examining the energy crisis in Europe is a spread between European gas futures and U.S. gas futures. The spread's extreme outlines the severity of the crisis. And it's a crisis of their own making. Idiots. We outlined last week how a possible polar vortex event could emerge in the U.S. in January, which could produce a bullish setup for U.S. natural gas. Of course, got to keep those speculators' pockets full of cash now, don't we? Anyway, aside from that, the Fed loses control as consumers now expect 10% inflation for key staples. And like a broken record here on the channel, seemingly, dear God, we've talked about inflation, how the myths about it, we've talked about how it was measured, has changed over time from 1982 to now. Some rogue players heading to the Fed back in 1982 with a little 38 revolver action and got thwarted, obviously. But nonetheless, another month, another record high in consumer inflation expectations. While central banksters, tenured economists, and the financial media are doing everything in their propaganda power to convince ordinary dupes Americans who don't have the privilege of charging their Federal Reserve debit card when shopping at the grocery store that the current phase of galloping inflation, to avoid the far more dreaded H word, is merely transitory and is in fact good for them. The following clown claimed overnight. And of course, talking about Paul Krugman over at the New York Times, total shill. Aside from priorities, is this even true? Is there any good reason to believe that inflation hits low income households especially hard? Is the guy serious? The shocking reality on the ground is that the Fed has effectively lost control over near term consumer inflation expectations. As New York Fed's own most recent survey of consumer expectations reveals, something which even Powell tacitly admitted when he said it's time to retire the transitory inflation term. According to the November installment of this closely watched survey, consumer inflation expectations for 1 year ahead hit a fresh all time high for this series of 6% up from 5.65% in October. Median short term, or 1 year ahead, inflation expectations increased in November by 0.35%, the 13th consecutive monthly increase and a new series high since the inception of the survey in 2013. And here we are going asymptotic here, going off the charts. Says, and while the median 1 year expected inflation rate was a modest 6%, the upper end of the 25 to 75% dispersion range was a mind blowing 9.7%, meaning that at least 25% of respondents see inflation surging to nearly double digits. At the same time, 25% of respondents expect inflation to be at or below the low level of 3%. And it says even more amazing is that consumers now expect prices for most key expenditures to rise by roughly 10% in the coming year. Among other things, consumers expect gas prices to rise 9.15%, food prices to rise 9.25%, medical costs to rise 9.6%, rent prices to rise 10%, and the median 1 year ahead expected change in the cost of a college education increased by 1.6 percentage points to 9.1%. Its highest reading since March 2015. Nuts. And this is what happens when you allow a rogue Fed to continually print money out of thin air. Hilariously, the chart above also shows that while the price of virtually everything is expected to soar by around 10% over the next year, the price of gold, which everyone by now knows is manipulated by both banks, dealers, and central banks will underperform everything and only rise 5%. Yeah, maybe we can unbind that. That said, having clearly lost all control over the 1 year forward data point, the Fed release instead focused its last remaining powers of persuasion on the long term inflation expectations, noting that median 3 year ahead inflation expectations decreased to 4% from 4.2% in both September and October. This is the first decline in a 3 year measure since June of 2021, and only the second decline since October 2020. For whatever that's worth. Says while that was good news, the not so good news that the decline in medium term expectations was driven by respondents without a college degree. Meanwhile, those who actually understand what's going on keep pushing long term inflation expectations higher. That's also why measures of disagreement across respondents, the difference between the 75th and 25th percentiles of inflation expectations, increased at both horizons to new series highs. Remarkably, both the Fed's 1-year and 3-year inflation expectations are now far above those observed most recently in the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, where the 1-year expectations are 4.9%, while the 5 to 10 inflation expectations remain about 3%. Expect both numbers to keep rising in coming months. And we won't get into the rest of that there, but bottom line, everybody per this survey expects that over the next year, uh, not much is going to change. It's going to continue to rise. So we're going to pay more for energy. You're going to pay more for your transportation. You're going to pay more for food and everything else. Now, I ask you folks in the audience, are your wages keeping up with that by chance? Is your employer giving you an extra 10, 12% raise to be able to keep up with said inflation? I think you already know the answer to that. Aside from that, California looks to stab rooftop solar customers in the back with massive incentive rollback and new fees. Now, wait a minute here. Help me understand this, right? Didn't we just have COP26 where, we had all these world leaders and their 400 some jets over there bloviating and passing a lot of hot air saying, oh, how great all this renewable energy is going to be, right? California has been leading the way in the country here. And now we get this. California regulators are eyeing sharp reductions in subsidies for residential solar systems in what would be the first major reform to a program to help jumpstart the rooftop solar industry, according to Bloomberg. It says, as part of a proposed series of changes issued on Monday by a judge at the California Public Utilities Commission, residential solar customers would receive a much lower credit for excess energy sent to the grid, with credits ranging from around 30 cents per kilowatt hour to less than 10 cents, depending on time of day. The proposal would also stick solar owners with nearly $500 per year in grid connection fees. The proposed amendments will undoubtedly impact the business of bolting solar panels on roofs across the U.S., an industry valued at more than $13 billion a year. A deep cut to incentives would likely slow installations in the largest solar state and prompt other sunny jurisdictions to follow. The issue has divided solar firms, consumer groups, environmental advocates, and utilities. New residential rooftop solar customers would get a 4-year credit to help them transition to the new rates that would allow them to pay back the cost of a solar and energy storage systems over 10 years. That out of Bloomberg. Net metering. California's solar incentive program is known as net energy metering and gives residential solar users a credit on their bill equal to the full retail price per kilowatt hour for excess electricity they send back to the grid. The subsidy helped boost the installation of 1.3 million home solar systems across the state, which is around 45% of the nation's total installations. And here we see number of home solar systems, U.S. Versus the rest of the states. California leading the pack, Arizona, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and pretty much everybody else is non-existent. Says, indeed, a key selling point of solar installations is how many years until the system reaches break even, when the cost of installation is paid for by the savings. The return on net metering is a key component of this. Critics of net metering says it allows rich homeowners with solar panels to effectively avoid paying their share of the cost of maintaining grid infrastructure. Oh, rich people, they're the only ones putting this on the roofs, I see, and of course we need to make them pay their fair share. Where have we heard that before? A study by the University of California, Berkeley, earlier this year estimated that in San Diego, where home solar accounts for more than 20% of residential power consumption, customers without solar are paying up to an additional $230 on their utility bills per year. Households with solar panels tend to be wealthier than those without, according to studies. That out of Reuters. It says in Southern California, providers SDG&E and SCE jointly proposed a sharp decrease in solar subsidies, as well as monthly connection charge approaching $100. Changes the utilities claim are necessary to make sure solar users pay for their fair share of the costs of maintaining and upgrading the power grid. It's a reverse Robin Hood situation, said Matthew Friedman, an attorney with California ratepayer advocacy group the Utility Reform Network, adding, and so we ask ourselves, should we be providing the largest subsidies to the richest customers in the state? According to the solar industry, such reforms would only hurt California's ability to fight climate change, and has proposed a gradual reduction in the net metering rate over 8 years. Solar companies would go out of business in towns all over the state, and the market would plummet if things such as monthly fees are adopted, according to Brad Havener, Policy Director for the California Solar and Storage Association. So, again, we'll have to see how this shakes out, but nonetheless, yeah, what's the incentive again? I don't see much of one if you have to pay to sell back your excess energy to the grid. Maybe it's time people actually start taking energy matters into their own hands. Maybe neighborhoods put in their own battery banks and storage systems, things of that nature, and give the big FU to all these companies. Maybe that's a better way to go. Just a thought. Aside from that, hospitals are dropping vax mandate due to labor shortages and court orders. Gee, there's a shocker. Who'd have thunk that putting all these mandates in place would not get 100% vaccination rates? I guess they must have thought that they would just, wipe this over the people, I guess, and everybody would comply and everything would be good. But no, they shot themselves in the foot, cut their nose to spite their face, put these stupid mandates in place, and now they're suffering the consequences of it. So on Sunday, we noted that hospitals in 4 states have called in the National Guard to help alleviate a severe healthcare worker shortage caused by mass firings of those who refuse to comply with vaccine mandates. Idiots. Says now, the Wall Street Journal reports that some of the largest U.S. hospital systems have dropped vaccine mandates for workers amid soaring labor costs and struggles retaining enough nurses, technicians, and even janitors to handle higher hospitalization rates due to the Delta variant. According to hospital execs, public health authorities, and nursing groups, pre-pandemic shortages of workers, including nurses, have been compounded by burnout, as well as the lucrative lure of nurses who work on short-term contracts in COVID hotspots. More recently, thousands of nurses have left the industry or lost their jobs rather than get vaccinated. As of September, 30% of workers at more than 2,000 hospitals across the country surveyed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention were unvaccinated. It's been a mass exodus, and a lot of people in the healthcare industry are willing to go and shop around, according to employment attorney Wade Simmons, head of Mercer's U.S. regulatory practice. If you get certain healthcare facilities that don't require it, those could be a magnet for those people who don't want the vaccine. They'll probably have an easier time attracting labor. In November, a federal judge in Louisiana ruled that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services didn't have the authority to force healthcare workers to take the jab, blocking a Biden admin rule which would have applied to some 10 million workers and would have required all employees at facilities participating in Medicare and Medicaid take the jab by January 4th. Says, I don't think the mandates were helpful, and I think the court in Louisiana did everyone a service, said Ballad Health CEO Ellen Levine, who oversees the administration of 21 hospitals in Tennessee and Virginia. Says Mr. Levine said his company has about 14,000 employees, some 2,000 of whom are unvaccinated or didn't request an exemption to the requirement. That many people having to be terminated would have been devastating to our system, Mr. Levine said, according to the Wall Street Journal. Meanwhile, one of the country's largest healthcare providers, HCA, suspended their previous deadline of January 4th for all workers following the court halt. We continue to strongly encourage our colleagues to get jabbed as a critical step to protect individuals from the virus, said spokesman Harlow Summerford, who added that a majority of the roughly 275,000 workers were fully vaccinated. Tenet and Advent Health also announced they were waiving the requirement following the court decision, while the Cleveland Clinic, which runs 19 hospitals in Ohio and Florida and employs roughly 65,000 people, along with Utah hospital giant Intermountain Healthcare, said they would similarly suspend the vax requirement. So there you have it. A little court action seems to thwart us all. And funny how that works. CEOs suddenly back off and say, well, boy, gee, we didn't realize that we were going to lose so many people, and that's going to potentially be devastating. And now you get idiot governors now deciding, oh, let's just go send in a National Guard in their stead. I mean, we can just pull people right off the street. I mean, what the hell? Let's just go to San Francisco and get the druggies off the streets and start piling them into the hospitals. How about that? There's a plan. Morons, I swear. Anyway, Vox buys Thrillist publisher Group 9 as a wave of media consolidation continues. And of course, that always seems to be the name of the game, all mergers and acquisitions. Says it has already been a pretty busy year for media deals. And as digital advertising rates quietly creep higher, Vox Media is responding to rival BuzzFeed's recent public offering via SPAC by acquiring rival Group 9, the publisher of Thrillist, Now This, The Dodo, Pop Sugar, and Seeker. How many of you guys subscribe to any one of those? Frankly, I've never heard of any of them. But nonetheless, it says if the all-stock deal goes through, Vox will own 75% of Group 9, according to internal memos seen by CNBC and the Wall Street Journal. The deal would leave the combined company a private firm. However, Vox would be free to use a SPAC set up by Group 9 to go public and raise more public and private funds if need be. Vox CEO Jim Bankoff and Group 9 CEO Ben Lehrer sent emails to employees after Wall Street Journal broke the news on Monday. A deal would mark the end of an excruciatingly long series of on and off talks with various digital media rivals. Group 9 has held on and off merger talks with Vox, BuzzFeed, and other digital media companies for years, as CNBC reported last week. The name of the game is scale. The more properties and clicks, the better equipped they will be to compete for advertising dollars with Facebook and Google. Vox's Bankoff reportedly told his staffers that the deal isn't signed but is expected to take place shortly and will close in early 2022. Lehrer will take a board seat at Vox. Vox's publications, which include New York Magazine, The Verge, Eater, Curbed, Vox, and SB Nation, will remain intact after the acquisition, according to the memo. He added that management has no plans to go public. Still, the SPAC we mentioned above isn't simply going away. If Vox changes its mind, or finds it needs more runway money to burn, the SPAC option remains open and easily accessible. So yes, kind of fun to watch all this media consolidation, and perhaps Vox, whether I don't know if they're necessarily a leftist rag or not. Periodically, you come across some of their articles, Vox, Vice, The Verge. Every one of those I thought were kind of leaning leftist, but hey, if people aren't reading their stuff, what do they got to do if they're not getting advertising dollars? What do? Well, they merge with somebody else, and hopefully they've got the cash flow to continue. Otherwise, perhaps they'll try and go the BuzzFeed route and try and get a SPAC, and that to try and stay afloat. Anyway, aside from that here on the morning, we got former Lehman Traders' $4 billion hedge fund books first loss in a decade on China carnage. And obviously this is fallout from the Evergrande stuff. And frankly, I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the coming weeks. Says for the first time in its nearly decade-long history, BFAM Partners, a hedge fund firm with more than $4 billion under management, is on track to report its first annual loss, largely thanks to the implosion of Evergrande. According to Bloomberg, the BFAM Asian Opportunities Fund has lost more than 10% in the first 11 months of the year. dropping about 7.5% in October and another 3.3% in November. Katarina Royds, who leads investor relations at BFAM, declined to comment. However, Bloomberg's inside sources revealed that the Asian Opportunities Fund suffered from selling pressure in Chinese real estate bonds. The firm was founded by former Lehman Brothers trader Benjamin Fuchs, but its credit strategies, including high-grade, high-yield credit default swaps and special situations, are led by Eugene Fung. Of course, one might expect a former Lehmanite to be somewhat more sensitive to nuctions in overleveraged property markets. And if you don't understand the Lehman side of things, if you think back to 2007, 2008, when we had the crash at that time, Lehman was the one that went under at that time. But the Hong Kong-based hedge fund firm had $4.9 billion in assets under management as of August, according to a fund document obtained by Bloomberg. The exact details of BFAM's Chinese credit holdings aren't known, but a gauge of junk bonds issued by Chinese property developers plunged 21% in October and another 4.9% in November. BFAM has faced similar setbacks in the past. The firm's Asian high-yield focused credit investment helped the firm chalk up a 17% loss during the month of March 2020 at the onset of the scamdemic. However, the firm largely held on to its assets, and a price rebound later in the year helped it to an 8.5% annual gain. Says, of course, it's not just Chinese credit that has blown up in investors' faces this year. A U.S. stocks trade near all-time highs. Chinese ADRs continue to struggle. Firms like Didi, the Chinese answer to Uber that was rug-pulled by the CCP just days after its U.S. IPO, and Alibaba, which has seen its shares continue to struggle, are well off their highs, and MCSI's Golden Dragon Index has been off by double digits since the fall. It says, meanwhile, as we have reported, Evergrande and Kaiser Group, two of the most prolific Chinese real estate dollar debt issuers, roiled markets for months before defaulting on debt obligations late last week, as Fitch declared Evergrande to be in restricted default. Fears of financial contagion sent the yield investors' demand for holding Chinese junk bonds to a record high on November 9th, 3 times its 5-year average, according to the Bloomberg Index. And it says that hedge funds would want to invest in Chinese real estate developers is hardly a surprise. As we have reported, the Chinese property market is probably one of the largest asset classes in the world. And so we'll break from that there and say that, yes, I think this is just the beginning of what we're going to see, and it'll be kind of surprising, I suppose, as to the amount of exposure some of these banksters, hedge funders, and that have to Chinese property markets by way of what's playing out with Evergrande, Kaiser, etc., etc. Wouldn't be surprised if we see the Banks of America's, the Citigroups, Goldman Sachs, and the like also take a bit of a hit here, and probably reflected in their first quarter financials. Outside of that, this morning we get the U.S. producer prices explode to record high in November, and there's worse to come. So just like last week we talked about the CPI, this time we talk about the producer side of things, the old PPI. Says after CPI's rise last week, which was somehow briefly seen as good news because it was lower than a wild whisper number, producer prices tore up the narrative this morning, printing a record-breaking 9.6% year-over-year rise, smashing expectations of 9.2% and well above the 8.6% year-on-year print for October. So like everything else, everything is on the up and up. Says worse still, core PPI surged. Ex-food and energy was up 7.7% year over year versus the 7.2% expected, 6.8% prior. Ex-food, energy, and trade is up 6.9% year over year versus a 6.3% prior. Both goods and services prices rose, with energy and transportation costs the biggest drivers. Within final demand goods in November, prices for iron and steel scrap rose 10.7%. The indexes for gasoline, fresh fruits and melons, fresh and dry vegetables, industrial chemicals, and jet fuels also moved higher. Conversely, prices for diesel fuel decreased 2.6%. The indexes for processed young chickens and for light motor trucks also fell. Leading the November increase in the index for final demand services, prices for portfolio management advanced 2.9%. The indexes for guest room rental, securities, brokerage, dealing, investment advice and related services, fuels and lubricants retailing, airline passenger services, and transportation of freight and mail also moved higher. In contrast, margins for chemicals and allied products wholesaling fell 1.3%. The indexes for furnishings, wholesaling, and for bundled wire telecommunications across services also declined. And here's the graphic depicting that for the month of November. Total final demand 0.8. The change in final demand, less foods, energy, and trade from 12 months ago, 6.9 right there. Says, and judging by the exploding pipeline for producer prices, things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. And again, highlighting the PPI index for final demand versus processed goods, etc., in red, we see that they are ratcheting up skyward. So that is the highest PPI intermediate since December 1974. And the U.S. had mile-long lines for gas. So there's that for some perspective here on where this is headed. Not good. And perhaps one last thing by way of some financials on the morning. No pancakes. IHOP blames Biden for having to cut store hours. Piece out of Todd Starnes here yesterday. What's the world coming to here if you can't go to a stinking IHOP and get pancakes? What's wrong with this scenario? Several IHOPs around the nation announced that they would have to reduce their hours of operation, and they blamed the reduction in services on President Biden. Due to the fact that Biden gave out way too much free money and nobody wants to work anymore, we are forced to reduce our hours during the week, the sign read. Unfortunately, Biden's policies have led to an epidemic of laziness among many Americans. Rep. Kevin Brady out of Texas, the ranking member of the House Ways and Means Committee, told the Daily Wire last August that President Biden's American Rescue Plan's $300 per week enhanced federal unemployment insurance was crushing Main Street businesses. He added, companies of all sizes simply can't find the workers they need, whether they're retailers, restaurateurs, or production lines. This is inevitable when you pay 4 out of 10 Americans more to stay home than to work. Who'd have thunk? IHOP, my family and I genuinely enjoy going to your restaurants. But if this is corporate policy, I guess we won't be visiting anymore. I know we're just one small family, and we don't matter, but we can't eat at a place that condones this. And apparently a tweet from Santa's flight attendant, that other dude 12, also out of RNC Research, an Arkansas business posted a letter blaming Biden for having to cut store hours. And there we see that. Let's see, Mark Judson for Congress says IHOP doesn't seem to know that Congress funds spending, not Biden. Also, when in Congress, I'm going to work to audit and report publicly where all of the Triple P money went. It was intended to keep small businesses afloat. Let's see who really got it. Retweet if you agree. And of course, we've obviously seen over the last year plus as the PPP loans now were distributed, many people on the take that probably should not have been in the mix, and plenty of fraud to boot. So aside from some financials on the morning, out of red state here, late last night, CDC data, global sources show majority of Omicron variant cases are among the fully vaccinated. No, can't possibly be. Says, for months, I and a few others across media have been saying that the COVID data doesn't match the hype, despite the CDC stating that the vaccinated are significantly more protected against all of the COVID-19 variants, including the latest Omicron variant. The data regarding the vaccines and the ever-increasing list of variants shows that the vaccines are not as effective as they advertise. Citizens from every country around the world have begun to demand answers to this discrepancy, often met with a tyrannical response from their governments. Says an enormous protest tonight in Germany to end lockdowns and COVID restrictions. Yeah, just a few people out mixing it up there, I suppose. And of course, another tweet here says unvaccinated people will be barred from public life in Germany. In all public places, only people who have been vaccinated are permitted. A yellow bracelet is mandatory for the unvaccinated. Yep, put on your yellow star, folks. Similar measures are expected to be announced in France on Monday. Of course, we got to identify them. The unclean. In Germany, police officers use foldable rulers to measure the distance between persons. That's apparently what cops do these days now, measure distances. 9 police officers harassed an 80-year-old woman for failing to show her vaccination pass. Several residents were deported to unknown locations after an anti-COVID protest. So things obviously heating up in Germany. Says as the evidence of vaccine ineffectiveness begins to mount, the government, big pharma, and the media continue their assault on truth and facts, stating that data presented that shows the vaccines are not as effective as they suggest is taken out of context or isn't comprehensive enough. Instead of publishing the complete data or perhaps showing those incomplete portrayals where they are lacking, the CDC and other agencies continue to just tell us to follow the science, or even in a case of Anthony Fauci, claim to be the science. When Omicron made its debut in southern Africa, the science community was quick to blame South Africa's low vaccination rate, calling the variant of the unvaccinated. Yet, when you look at the data, it again disagrees with that assertion, as shown in this piece written on November 29th by yours truly. Even with the updated data, South Africa, with a 23.8% vaccination rate, has seen an over 1,100% increase in cases over the last 2 weeks. Now, should Omicron, the strain primarily responsible for the rise in cases, be more deadly than previous strains, there should have been a greater rise in the death rate. Or, in other words, an over 1,100% rise in deaths in that country. Of course, that isn't the case, as COVID deaths in the country have just had an 8.63% rise over the last 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Portugal, with an 88.3% vaccination rate to date, has had a 46% rise in COVID cases. The case-demic, folks. It's all about the cases. If you go and get tested, guess what? You are contributing to the case-demic. Quit getting tested. And a 50.63% increase in COVID deaths over the same period. France has had nearly 70% of their population fully jabbed, but yet has had a 92% increase in their case load. What does the cases mean? Nothing, when you got a faulty test. And a 100.9% increase in their deaths. Clearly, vaccines have nothing to do with new caseloads or deaths. South Africa's large caseload is likely a result of South Africa having dodged previous spikes in COVID numbers around the globe. However, with the significantly decreased severity of Omicron cases, they may have just lucked out again. South Africa's first cases of Omicron allegedly came from Botswana. However, each of the earliest identified cases was in people who were, again, fully vaccinated. And that's absolutely true. The first paper that I saw from their epidemiologists, virologists, whoever, scientists, clearly stated, highlighted. Somebody had highlighted the paper. 4 people, fully jabbed. Sky News also had an article on November 30th, which shatters the variant of the unvaccinated narrative. The story follows 2 travelers from Hong Kong who had traveled to South Africa, returning on November 12th to Hong Kong. Both passengers followed the extreme restrictions for traveling, including being fully jabbed. mask wearing the entirety of the trip, testings upon departure, testing upon return, and a mandatory quarantine upon their return. Both completed the first 4 requirements with ease. However, despite their vaccination status, mask wearing, and double negative tests, both patients tested positive during the mandatory 21-day quarantine. The vaccines didn't stop it. The masks didn't stop it. The testing didn't catch it. In other words, Omicron, which clearly and inarguably is more transmissible, seems to completely dodge the vaccines, yet despite this mountain of data showing this, governments across the globe continue to suggest that the best way you can avoid getting Omicron is to be fully vaccinated. Do more of the same, expect different results. Right? Isn't that the definition of insanity? Repeating the same thing, expecting different results. But yet, isn't that the same garbage you hear spewed out of Circleback, Psaki, and Joe? Moronic. It's not about science. It's not about health. It's about control, folks. So that's probably a good place to break from that article. Think we get the idea behind this. We've talked ad nauseum about it. But aside from that here on the morning, from one side of the equation to the other, obviously the great push is for the Great Reset, using the COVID-19 as the reason, never letting a good crisis go to waste. We get this out of the Liberty Beacon. It says, strategic resistance to the World Economic Forum's Great Reset gathers pace. Let's see, Robert Burrows and Anita McCone say, the We Are Human, We Are Free campaign was launched earlier this year. It is designed to enable people to participate in a grassroots, nonviolent campaign to strategically resist the World Economic Forum's Great Reset and related initiatives of the global elite, scratch that, parasites, including the transhumanist, eugenics, and cyber polygon agendas. Since being launched, people have been joining from all over the world. A key initiative of the campaign was to prepare and design a one-page flyer so that people could be given, by various means, a short list of nonviolent actions that offered a series of simple but powerfully effective ways in which anyone could participate in the strategy to defeat the globalist agenda. Says, with the invaluable assistance of members of the campaign from around the world, translations of this one-page flyer are now available in English, Finnish, French, German, Greek, Hungarian, Italian, and Spanish, with other languages imminent or in the pipeline. Each of the posters, the English version is below, is available on the website. And if this campaign interests you, the website is above and our Telegram group is here. For those of you on Telegram, I'll drop the link here in just a moment. It says you can also watch a video interview explaining what is happening and how to address it effectively too. Watch Hannah Maria interviews Robert Burrows, The Origin of Violence. It says you are welcome to join us. And here is said flyer. We are human, we are free. Worldwide nonviolent resistance to elite control. We are human, we are free is a worldwide nonviolent resistance movement to free ourselves from elite control and resist the forces of fear and dehumanization. Our aim is to build a mass civil resistance movement to undermine the power of the criminal global elite to control us and regain the freedoms that make our lives worth living. Because we are human, we are free to make choices. The time has come to choose. Are we on the side of love, life, and freedom, or fear, self-imprisonment, and tyranny? So there you have it. There is perhaps a little bit of an awakening going on in that regard. You guys can check that out there. And last but not least, on the morning here, one final piece is this out of the New American. The new UN statue, the beast of revelation or revelatory about the times, or both. You guys heard about this? I didn't even know this was a thing until came across it here this morning. But apparently this is said statue that the UN has now put out. Says art, like morality, consists of drawing the line somewhere, noted G.K. Chesterton in 1928. As to this, critics of a new statue erected outside UN headquarters in New York City say it crosses the line. In fact, they claim the work crosses up the cross, in that it depicts a demonic end times beast. When I first heard about this, I could hardly believe that the global elite would be so brazen, remarked blogger Michael Snyder, who says the statue appears to be very closely resemble a beast that is described in the book of Revelation. The work, which is named the Guardian for International Peace and Security, and is a gift from the government of Oaxaca, Mexico, and apparently entered our country legally, is a fusion of jaguar and eagle, according to this website. It also has been painted in LGBT colors, writes Snyder. Below is an image of the statue along with another that some observers liken to it. And from the socialist there, the beast of peace, out of hashtag Revelation. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. That from Revelation 13:2, King James Version edition. So Snyder also writes that, of course, when Christians see this monstrosity, they are immediately going to think of the beast that is described in Revelation chapter 13. And there is the verse Annette just read. Says, this perception certainly is reflected in the Twitter thread here, though some take a different perspective. A very level-headed editor I know, a strong Christian, said that he didn't think the statue was all that reminiscent of the Revelation beast. He further stated that while he neither liked the UN and nor believed it should be in our country, he found it unsurprising that the organization would feature international art because it is, after all, an international entity. The editor also mentioned that the controversy reminded him of the notorious Blue Mustang statue at Denver International Airport, dubbed Blucifer, because of its color and glowing red and some would say demonic eyes, and because a section of the work fell off its creation and killed its creator, sculptor and artist Luis Jimenez. And I'll drop the link to this. You guys can check that out afterwards as well. It says, yet as the editor also pointed out, and as Photors.com explains, the eyes are a tribute to Jimenez's father, who owned a neon sign workshop. In other words, Jimenez's intentions were apparently entirely innocent. Yet does this mean such work's effect is entirely innocuous? The question is deeper than that of whether the UN is purposefully erecting satanic symbols, but is rarely addressed. Moreover, the larger picture is that the gyps statue is part of a larger problem. Whether satanic, moronic, or something else, the statue might be of relatively little consequence where it is an anomaly. And here's the big picture. It says, over the last many decades, our society has been denuded of its historically present Christian symbols, sentiments, and observances. Some examples are how Christmas break has been replaced on school calendars with winter break. Christian symbols have been removed from city seals, and crosses and Ten Commandments have been expelled from public property. In more recent times, statues of our historic heroes, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and even more to the point, one of St. Junipero Serra, have been taken down. But as with nature, cultural landscapes abhor a vacuum, and our Christian cultural elements have been replaced with things such as a statue of crack-using Mayor Marion Barry in Washington, D.C., one of Marxist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin in Seattle, images of criminal George Floyd, and works such as the Gyps and Blue Mustang. Put differently, our culture's flavor is being transformed from a Christian one to, if not an unchristian one, then at least a non-Christian one. In fact, it's becoming a very pagan one. Consider, for example, that UN statue donor, Oaxaca, Mexico, is a place known for its indigenous peoples and customs, and the work reflects its pre-Columbian pagan past. So, for that matter, the Statue of Liberty, a gift from the post-revolutionary France, was influenced by the pagan Colossus of Rhodes and was meant to be in the nature of a colossal goddess. This does not, in and of itself, mean it's a bad thing. We've long embraced many innovations from our pagan past, such as concrete from the Romans and our calendar. What's more, some say this de-Christianization is a good thing, and arguing that is beyond the article's scope. I'm only right now pointing out that it's a real thing, and real changes should be considered soberly, not affected bull in a china shop style. Says, of course, none of this is surprising. It's common to blame leftist cultural revolutionaries for our de-Christianization, and they are the instigators. But a small group that instigates is impotent without a majority that tolerates, and most Americans simply don't care nearly as much about preserving tradition as the ne'er-do-wells do about tearing it down. But people will naturally create a culture that reflects what they are, and research shows that Christian belief has been steadily declining in the United States. Furthermore, insofar as its extent, Americans' dedication to Jesus is, in most cases, a mile wide and an inch deep, stated Barna Group Research Company President David Kinnaman, 2015. Kinnaman ought to know too. In 2002, his studies found that only 9% of born-again teens believed that morality was absolute. They're moral relativists. Relativism doesn't breed passion, and it doesn't win culture wars with those who, specializing in self-deification, make everything absolutely relative to themselves. Interesting. Interesting piece out of the New American here, highlighting the beast apparently now sitting outside of the UN. Frankly, I'm of the opinion the UN shouldn't even exist on these lands. I'd rather see it gone, get it out of here. But of course, that's my opinion, and I'm sure many of you guys have yours as well. So that is going to do it for the broadcast this morning. Appreciate you guys tuning in as always. And as I mentioned yesterday, stay tuned. I will be having a fireside here very, very shortly. Uh, and that's if you guys are naughty or nice, I suppose, given the season. But nonetheless, we'll give it a go here soon. And if I don't see you before then, we'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same place, same channel. Take care, God bless, and we'll see you back on the next one.